What's cracking, people? It's your man Cousin T, aka the Alpha Wingman, representing high-level technicians operating globally and beyond. So listen, today I wanted to go into another major dimension of what a masculine master looks for and the type of desirable woman that he will look to seduce. And I'm very specific and I'm very deliberate with uh, my wording here because most men only view women one dimensionally. Is she hot? Is she my type of sex? Can I smash? But a masculine master appreciates more than just one dimension when approaching and observing and ultimately um, seducing a potential target. You see, we've already covered one major dimension. Today we're going to cover another major dimension, which is the Octane Scale. In a future podcast, we're going to cover a third dimension, which is the SMV. All three of these dimensions are covered in my book, The Seduction Scriptures. But for today, I want to drive home the importance of understanding where a woman places on the Octane Scale. And basically, just to give a brief definition or description of what BGS's Octane Scale is, I'll read the page that describes it in my book, The Seduction Scriptures. And this is from the glossary, page 160, under Octane Scale. It says, a system of categorizing the social status of members of a society. Now, usually when we have a discussion that involves the Octane Scale, the Octane Model, instead of just using the word social, we use the word socioeconomic. That's because, logically, when we compare a person's income and their labor status or their vocational status or their job status, be it like a management level as compared to a non-skilled worker, they generally give us an indication of what their behavioral output will be. Generally, nothing's perfect, obviously, but there's a very close correlation between a person's income, their labor output status, meaning their rank, whether or not they're a skilled, unskilled worker or part of the management class or even the executive class. That's going to determine what their behavior patterns are, which directly correlates with how they are socialized. And that's why the Octane Scale is a really reliable point of reference when comparing a person's behavior to where they are in society. And that's an oversimplified version of it, but I wanted to include a simplified version of the greater Octane Scale for this book because, long story short, when I first began writing or putting together notes for the Seduction Scriptures, I had come up with my own model or my own scale that modeled certain levels of behavior on some other naturally occurring events in nature. And it would have been, super complicated, unnecessarily complex. And then I heard BGS IBMOR's video analysis of the Insecure series, and that's really where he began the work of assembling and working out sort of how the Octane model would work and how it applies first to the characters within the Insecure series, but then to how behaviors are expressed in greater society. And so using the model of octane grades of fuel and how refined or unrefined a type of fuel is given its application and how that matches up with the socialized behavior patterns of various levels of members of society was brilliant. And it's usually the simple things that are the most brilliant. And when I saw that, I was like, boom, that's exactly what would be a great model to use when expressing another dimension of when a man observes various aspects of a woman. Perfect. And so when compiling the information for the section of my book that includes the BGS IBMOR's Octane Grade scale, I wanted to do a couple things. The first thing was correspond with BGS to make sure that the representation that I was going to provide of his scale was sufficient enough to publish. And this is because I know that ultimately he's producing a book that's going to do the entire 360 in-depth deep dive understanding about the Octane scale model and what that means in society, past, present, future, and all that great stuff. So I just wanted to reference that and use what that means in the realm of seduction for when a masculine master is observing a target, when he's observing a woman. These are the takeaways. And if you turn to page 48 of the seduction scriptures, it goes into a breakdown of what scales I wanted to, or what grades I wanted to include of the Octane scale. I used the diesel, I used the 100, I used the 92, I used the 89, and the 87. Now, as in other videos, people may know that I purposely leave out the 85, even though, when I was doing a breakdown of the Octane scale observations from my perspective, I had to include the 85 just to show the contrast between the other levels. But I do this specifically because in the select manosphere, we do not go below the 87 Octane grade. If you're encountering a woman or a group of women, a female group hierarchy, or whatever, of women who are displaying behavior, who are dressed in a way that is dipping below the 87, run. That's the only advice that I would personally give. I'm sure BGS will include the 85, for his deep dive in his book. But for the sake of my book and the perspective of seduction, I left the 85 out, and that's the only thing I'm going to note. But getting back into this, when we look at the woman's Octane grade, we're looking at, like I said before, the breakdown of her clothing, because clothing is the uniform of the class of desire. We're listening to how she speaks, because the language of her Octane grade is going to be spoken when you get her in comfortable quarters. Third is the mask. And the mask is spoken of in the previous section on page 42. And in verse 5, I'm talking about the female group hierarchy, but I'm referencing the Octane scale when I say this. Here's verse 5. Most professional women, or 92 octanes, are too uptight when initially presented with a strip club, bachelorette party, or girls' night out. This is because they have been trained to wear two masks. The first mask is their marketing rep mask. This is needed to navigate the professional world of contracts, memos, files, meetings, etc. It's also the mask that they show most men because of the social rules of engagement that frame the vanilla world. The second mask is their sex rep. Now, I'm going to go a little further in depth on the mask from my perspective in another video, but the key takeaway that I want you guys to receive from this particular presentation is this. When we observe women in terms of their Octane scale position or their grade, we're observing her clothes, we're observing the mask that she's presenting of her station in life. And we're listening to her language. Those are the three aspects that, in my experience and in my position, express a woman's octane scale grade. This is something that you can do right now. You can go to a place in your home or your apartment or your residence, look at the pictures of the history of women that you've encountered, that you've desired, that you've pursued, and you can apply what was just mentioned, those three aspects of the octane scale, to those women who are in your past, the women who are currently in your life now, and the type of women that you follow or that you may be pursuing in the future. This is actionable information that can be used right now, but it's only the second dimension of three. We're going to go over the third dimension that a masculine master observes initially. There are more than that, but just initially what a masculine master observes when he is seeking out a woman that he desires for his purposes, his mission, his roster, wherever he is in his life, to bring it to his space. But what's the point of all this? What is the why? Well, I'll leave you with this. As men, our ability to observe the past, present, and future is what makes us human. The ability to own the choices we make based upon those observations proves our agency. And understanding how the sum of our choices can liberate us from the trappings of a given scenario grants our sovereignty. Select men, pre-select men, non-select men. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And as always, this is your man Cousin T, aka the Alpha Wingman, saying, stay sharp and mission focused. Later.